Hello, everybody. Welcome back to On the Couch. And I want to hit a couple of things before we actually jump into the interview today. And I have somebody very special that I want you to meet. I think the topic we're going to be talking about today touches a lot of different people. And just a reminder as to why we're doing On the Couch episodes. This is designed to bring you information about relative counseling topics, current counseling topics. You will see us interview counselors on our own team here at Life in Abundance. And we are a counseling nonprofit ministry here in the upstate. We believe that by offering counseling to men, women, and children, that we can strengthen families in the upstate, which then strengthens our community. And so the other topics that we will be talking about will be related to functional medicine and functional nutrition. We'll be interviewing various professionals in those arenas as well. And we want to also highlight other ministries that may have resources that you might find beneficial but may not be aware of. I've noticed that there are a lot of ministries around, and there may be lack of understanding that they're present or of what they offer. And so that's part of what we do. Now, slight disclaimer here to start with. One that I need to do, and that is that I am on staff at Life in Abundance. I'm not just the executive director, I'm what's known as a clinical pastoral counselor on staff as well. I am not licensed by the state of South Carolina, so I just need to get that disclaimer out of the way right now. My credentials are held through the National Christian Counselors Association. And so I will be talking with other pastoral counselors whose credentials are what mine are. And I will also be talking to other counselors throughout interviews that are state licensed, and just want to be very upfront with you about that to start with. Now, today's guest that we're going to be talking to is Debbie Bergey. And she is a wonderful, wonderful woman. I have the privilege of knowing her now for several years, and her story is one that I think that you will find filled with things that you may have already experienced in your life. You will find hope in it, and you'll also find some sadness in it, because life brings suffering, and it brings struggles. And Debbie is a wonderful example of finding God in the midst of wherever you happen to be. I love that so much about her. Without further ado, I want to introduce to you Debbie Bergey. Debbie is a registered nurse with special training for operating room procedures. And so, Debbie, welcome. We are so glad to have you here today. Thank you for being willing to talk to us on our On the Couch series. Welcome.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I want to start off by just talking about the fact that this subject is caregiving, and caregiving of a loved one, and walking through a tough diagnosis, and walking through what it was like to get the diagnosis, and what your life has looked like along with your loved one. Tell us briefly the scenario that we're going to be diving into today. A little bit of background about the scenario.
Okay. I'm married to Ray Bergey, and we've been married for 45 years.
Okay.
We're originally from the southeastern part of Virginia, and we have two daughters, and we are presently living in Greenville, and they both live locally within 10 or 12 miles of us each way. And we have 7 grandchildren, and we love living in Greenville. And I found a wonderful job here, and Ray was a realtor with a real well-known national company and quite successful. And in December of 2013, December 18th, to be exact, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. He was still high functioning. He had a slight tremor, and only when he double clicked on his computer mouse, and his primary care physician said, "Let's get you checked out by a neurologist," that led to his testing and diagnosis. So we have been on this journey just almost 11 years. And he was driving, working, attending church, everything normal. People didn't believe he had Parkinson's. And then in 2020, due to increased medications and all, they decided that we could be a candidate for deep brain stimulation. And that's like a pacemaker for your brain.
Mhm.
So we had that implanted, and that was a big help. But we have noticed a significant decline in his physical and his cognitive function in the last year. So that has catapulted me into a more extreme caregiving position.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the diagnosis. What was that as a wife? What was that like for you when he received the diagnosis? I'm assuming you were with him at the appointment.
I was with him. Um, we had been told that the possibility of Parkinson's was pretty strong, but they wanted to confirm that it wasn't other things. So that's why they did the diagnostic testing.
Mhm.
Presently, there are some definitive testing with skin biopsies, and that would have, of course, been a little quicker, easier, whatever. But there was a period of, are you really sure? And life went on normally. And there was a little dosage of medication, and then that dosing increased in the potency of it, and then it had to become um, more often. And I think when we had to go on the meds and change the medication, we realized it was real. If he didn't have it, we were left with him in a situation where he might lose his balance,
Mm,
would have a tremor and couldn't work at his computer as well. Sometimes his vision would become double.
mm,
And the day we were diagnosed, we left the office and went to lunch and decided how we were going to tell our children. And we wanted to tell them right away. A lot of patients will say, oh, well, let's just keep this hidden until we absolutely have to give it away. And one of the things I'm used to taking care of people in surgery. I worked in an ER, worked in recovery room. They were all short-term care. And I did my job and it was over. And this job is not over. And I
right.
use the term job, but we realized that there was some responsibilities that would have to be traded. um,
Mhm,
he normally did through the course of this illness. And it wasn't like we had to make a plan for that day, December 18th, and it was going to
mhm,
change totally. What
mhm.
had to change was our planning.
Okay. What would you say the first thing that you began to really notice was, and how long after the diagnosis?
The first thing I noticed, and I want to give some background. One of the best things, there can be all sorts of medications out there. One of the best things is exercise and physical activity and
Mhm,
cognitive activity. And we immediately started on that path with, it's a program called Rock Steady Boxing. There's a program called Big and Loud that helps with your vocal power and your enunciation, because one of the side or symptoms of Parkinson's is that your voice gets lower and garbled. So we started working on that. And our girls are both medical people. So we were watching him very closely.
mhm,
And really, the first thing that happened was some of his executive function dropped out. I'm a person that needs to know what I'm doing 2 years from Thursday. And we couldn't plan like that anymore because we didn't know what 2 years from Thursday was going to look like. We could plan for several weeks, but there were good days and there were, I don't want to say bad days, but there were days where we had to adjust because of his functional capabilities.
mhm.
And the thing that went first was the executive function, where I could plug in all these things on my calendar or our calendar,
Mhm.
and he couldn't quite get them straight. So there was um, persistent coaching that I wasn't used to, because in our marriage, we were a pretty good partnership of
Mhm.
telling each other, oh, don't forget about, whatever on tomorrow at 2, or remember you have to make a phone call to this or that. And so we resorted to extensive list making.
Mhm.
And there was an index, we have an index card of the day, and
Okay.
everything that needs to be done for Ray and I, because he gets overwhelmed if it's just his list.
Okay.
So making list and that executive function where he could not
Mhm.
organize his days was probably the first thing that dropped out and altered our daily living.
So from a medical perspective, let's go and for those that don't understand executive function, the way I would define it for a client would be the area of the brain where truth resides, reason and logic reside, and conscience resides. As a medical professional, how would you describe the executive function area? We're talking prefrontal cortex.
And it's all those things, but it is also taking on a project or multitasking and
Hmm.
put it in a proper order in order to execute it.
Gotcha.
Hence, it's not a man at a big desk executive. It's executing your task.
Right. Seeing it through from start to finish in a
That's
logical fashion.
right.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like you guys were extremely schedule driven and independently so with your own interests, work and whatnot. You were working at the time, you're still working, in fact. Tell me about how that has impacted your overall walk with this. Has it made the fact that you're working, has it made it tougher? Has it made it better? Is it both of those things for you as a caregiver? How has that impacted you?
I cut back my work. I was working full time, about 38, 40 hours a week. And I cut back to what they call PRN as necessary. And I'm scheduled 4 days a month. There's several things that drive that. One, I don't want to give up my license, because if I do, I can't function as an RN when I volunteer places, and I love to volunteer. Two, it's a mental break and a bit of a mental
Mhm.
exercise, and it's time for me.
Right.
You cannot give out without recharging your battery, and
That's
that's
right.
my battery. So it affected my work, but it did not take it away from me. I'm
Right.
We are making it work with less hours.
Right.
I can still be that nurse and volunteer if I want to, but when I leave the house, there is a consciousness level, and I leave him another index card with his medications.
Hmm.
Don't forget it. I don't like to make a to-do list because
Right.
those words overwhelm. And this is a don't forget, you know, you're meeting Tom for lunch at 11:30, you've got boxing at 1 o'clock, you've got, whatever.
Mhm.
So I'm still able to do that.
Mhm.
But of note, 1 year ago, I bought cameras for the inside and outside of our house because Ray's sustained some injuries working in the yard.
Mhm.
He's fallen here in the house when I just tell him that was a bad decision. I'm sorry, you're not 30 years old. And he is 68 and I'm 71. So sometimes you have conflicting, is this age or Parkinson's?
Mhm.
And Parkinson's is a neurodegenerative, eventually terminal illness if something else doesn't take away your life before then. So Some people he was considered young onset because it was before the age of 60. And sometimes that moves more briskly to the terminal end. But he's done really, really well. And people commented for the first 10 years, check that diagnosis. He can't have Parkinson's. But when
Mhm.
some of his cognitive abilities started dropping out, then they were,
Mhm.
well, not many people mention it, but I can tell that they direct conversations a little more intricately
Mhm.
and to make sure he understands, which we totally appreciate.
Right,
So,
absolutely. So from the medical perspective, we know what your background is. You mentioned that both of your kids, I call them kids, they're grown-ups, but they are medical professionals as well. Um, I would guess that having a medical background has been helpful in advocating for Ray.
mm,
I'm wondering, though, there may be listeners right now that don't fully understand even the term neurodegenerative. So, in layman's definition, can you explain to us the area of the brain outside of executive function? What's going on that's causing this to happen? What do we know about that?
Parkinson's, it affects deep down in the center of the brain. If you drilled a hole in the top of your head, you would get to the part called the hold on,
Mhm.
substantia. Anyway, right in the middle of the brain that controls movement, tremor, some what we call autonomic, those automatic things that happen in your body, like balance,
Mhm.
coordinating your vision with other parts of your brain. And when those things are affected and you're not using the rest of your body, like let's say he stumbles, he's imbalanced with his posture, he's not going to exercise and his muscles aren't going to work as well too. So when you add the lack of being able to be coordinated with the lack of being able to exercise, you have to be real explicit with what exercises you choose. But there are approximately 12 kinds of Parkinson's.
Wow.
And it's everything from tremors in your hands to very fast moving loss of physical capabilities and mental capabilities. There's a thing that happens during sleep where your brain sort of cleanses itself, and that's interrupted in Parkinson's. So you get these little tangles in your brain, and they don't get cleaned up because part of Parkinson's also, for most people, has a sleep disorder to it. And Ray has that REM sleep disorder, and he acts out his dreams.
Mhm.
He doesn't get to real deep restorative sleep,
Mhm.
but he sleeps long. When he gets real exhausted, our recent storms that we had and all those things, emotions are taxing also. So this
Mhm.
affects your whole brain. But the point, like where he has his DBS probes, his deep brain stimulator, is in that substantia that helps override medication. And
Okay.
it's a lack of dopamine, and that part of your brain produces dopamine. So we've substituted the lack of dopamine with electricity
Right.
with medication.
Okay. Um, how did was it from your medical background that you were aware of the deep brain stimulation, or was that something that a neurologist basically led you to know more about and move towards as far as treatment?
Our daughters and myself, being medical people, don't settle for what we're told at a doctor's visit.
Okay.
We love our doctors,
Mhm.
but if there's something new and we beat them to the computer, There's several sites that we go to that are very informative.
Mhm.
And first of all, you must be an advocate for the person you're caring for.
Absolutely.
And the the Bergey girls could be considered a bit assertive about that. And one of our daughters is a physician. One of our daughters is a highly skilled nurse. And we hear about something, see about something, we share it, we investigate it, and we start asking questions.
Mhm.
We will knock on doors, we will make phone calls, we will whatever it takes because our job, and let me just tell you, you must have a team. You cannot take on caregiving by yourself.
That's right.
And it doesn't have to be your medically inclined offspring. We have people in our life. There's a gentleman from our small group, and he just comes over and says, "Hey, Ray, what can I help you with?" I'm not even sure that John realizes that he's also giving Debbie a break. He's being with Ray.
Yeah.
We have a sister, he has a sister that lives close by, like 5 to 7 minute walk from our house.
Mhm.
And the days that I work, she knows, and she stops by. Hey, how you doing? Whatever. She doesn't have to stay here for hours. She has taken him to appointments on occasion. And do not send the person you're caregiving to a physician or a physical therapist or an occupational therapist or a speech therapist by themselves.
Right.
First of all, everybody needs two sets of ears in those.
Agreed.
And second of all, they may confirm or deny some new information that you have. And I'm
Right.
very encouraged by going with him because they'll say, "Well, I'm trying this new thing and I may have read about it, or if I haven't, probably within 60 minutes of leaving there, I have read about it."
Yeah, I
So,
could see that. So being an advocate, I fully agree with you. You know my feelings on that. We have to be our own advocates for our own health as well.
mhm.
Um, um, I'm curious. Your life has changed. Obviously, Ray's life has changed. Your life has changed. Talk to me about care for the caregiver. What matters? What have you found helpful in this journey?
I have had to realize that this may be a 24/7 job, but I don't have to do it all myself. And there are people. I know it's hard if you're living in an area where you don't have relatives or you don't have what you feel like is a network. Early on, if you get the diagnosis tomorrow, you need to make a list of people who can be on your team. And everybody's got a skill that's willing to do that.
Mhm,
So you have to be willing to give up some of your control and power. That was a tough one for me.
mhm,
You have to decide what you need to recharge your batteries.
right.
Some people have offered, well, I'll come over and sit with Ray. Well, Ray doesn't do sitting very well. I mean, unless he's sleeping.
Mhm,
I appreciate that. And he doesn't really need babysitting right now.
right.
But if you want to go for a walk with him or go up and hit a bucket of balls, he may fall down or get wobbly, but he's got a friend that goes up and to the driving range with him. The thing that I do is I've taken up some weird hobbies. Okay. Um, best friend named Suzanne. And about 5 years ago, we decided we needed a hobby that wasn't an old lady hobby. So we took up beekeeping, and that took time. She lives about 12 miles away. So I would have travel time there. We would work with bees together. We would talk about bees on the phone. We'd send each other articles. There was something besides taking care of Ray that occupied me and
Right.
allowed me to be with my best friend of she Suzanne and I were friends before Ray met Debbie. So we go way back.
Yeah.
We got too old to be beekeepers because it was heavy lifting and all. So now we're rock hounders. And there's a stream behind my house and a stream behind her house. And we go putzing around in the stream for pretty rocks. And we're planning on going up to several places once they dry out a bit after
Yes.
storms. And I bet you there's some good rocks there. But you have to design a team to help you fill in the blanks.
Mhm. Yeah.
Know you can depend on them. You don't want to get in a frenzy. Our neighbors also know that Ray has Parkinson's, and there's been twice that I've been at work and he hasn't answered the phone. I, after several tries over the course of an hour, called our next door neighbor and I said, Helen, would you mind just running next door and seeing if Ray's in the yard maybe? And didn't
Mhm.
phone. Or if he answers the door, tell me if his car's there because we live in an over 55 community and
Mhm.
he's allowed to drive independently on that area. So he may have
Mhm.
decided to, I don't know, go somewhere on campus.
Mhm.
So, and they've run over and they said, oh no, he answered the door and his phone was back in the bedroom and he didn't hear it. So we're okay. But you have to develop those things before you get in crisis.
Yeah.
And I have a notebook that when I think of something, it's not the Parkinson's notebook, and I may have to thumb through it a little,
Mhm.
but I have a notebook of skills that people have. Like Ray used to fix everything in the house. Well, he can't do that now. But Tom, the guy across the street, is handyman extraordinaire. And
Right.
now I can call him for
Mhm.
something. Um, uh, you just have to make those things. And quite honestly, there's times I just need a break.
Right.
He has worn me out. And
Right.
I don't feel bad about saying that
Right.
because I made a commitment to him 40 some years ago. He's
Mhm.
told me several times, you didn't sign up for this, Deb. I said, yeah, I did in front of a bunch of witnesses. There was good food afterwards. So we're okay. And he said, but it's so much on you and all. And that balance of, I don't want to call it power, but it's responsibility
Mhm.
is real touchy sometimes. When I take care of all the finances now. We sort of weaned that over to me during the course of a couple of years.
Mhm.
But if it's something big, I will tell him about it. Um, he does make some financial decisions, and like he went and had some work done on the car for $350. We have a little rule: if it's over 50, we need to talk about it.
Mhm.
I've slipped up sometimes too and spent more than that and not talked. And you cannot set a pattern down and stay to it because it's always a fluid situation.
Right. Right.
Just make it the best you can. And there's times that I have said, I'm going to sit outside and God and I just have to have a talk. In Matthew 11, it says, are you tired? Are you worn out? Burned out on religion? Because there's times where I'm like, my goodness, you know, why is this happening? Why
Mhm.
is this? And then I go back to, we're not guaranteed this
Nope.
field of flowers and skipping through it towards, you know,
Right.
the ultimate nirvana or whatever that is. We're not
Right.
need that. What we're
No,
need.
John 16:33 tells us in this world you will face trials and struggles,
Yeah.
right? We don't really talk a lot about that. I think as Christians, we don't I didn't hear that really growing up
Oh,
in church. When you accept Christ into your life, you don't when I was growing up, you'd go down to the front of the church, right? And commit your life, but you don't it wasn't, and here's your lovely parting gift of suffering. Like it wasn't it, so I
Exactly.
think we find ourselves sometimes in that situation, and then I know from the things that I hear on the couch in my office in sessions, there's this tendency to go, I'm not praying enough. Maybe I'm not praying enough. Maybe this is something that, I'm being punished for, or we're being punished for. And that's not it. I mean, yes, there are natural consequences to sin, but we're not talking about that here. So the question I have for you is, where do you see God in the midst of the diagnosis, for someone you love? I mean, it does one other thing. It does change the marital landscape. It changes the landscape of the marriage and how the marriage functions without question when you become a caregiver. But where do you, as the caregiver, where do you see God, his hand in this?
Um, Ray is still a kind, gentle, generous man. That hasn't gone away. It presents itself differently sometimes. Where, I mean, he wanted to get in the car and go help the storm victims right then, right there. And I said, let's see what they need. And there's going to be a time we have designated a community, and our daughters and son-in-laws and some of their Christian friends found a little community that had been not found 1 week after the storm up
Mhm.
outside of Burnsville,
Mm,
about 15 miles outside of there. And they had prayed, Lord, take us where these people have need. So
mhm.
we got to be part, Ray and I did, of sending things.
Yeah.
People would donate money. We would go buy stuff. Hey,
Mhm.
I'm really good at that. So anyway, so we would do that. Our son-in-law took it up to them. There's an ongoing effort. They were begging for warm clothes because the weather's getting cool. They have lots of water. They have the food they need. But Ray wants to go up there, and we're going to go up there. But 20 years ago, we would have
Right.
there and lived up there for 2, 3, 4 weeks or whatever. And we've done relief work with Katrina. I've been to Sri Lanka with the tsunami. So we're used to being front line, and there's a new season for us.
Yes.
But it isn't that we're not responding. We have to respond in a different way.
I
But
think I think what I hear you saying is that you've gotten creative, and the response looks a little different than it might have. You're sort of able to kind of, examine where the abilities are. I mean, obviously, you wouldn't want, you or Ray to have to navigate rough terrain. That would not be wise. But yet, still connecting to the mission of loving people, and being able to send things like that. I love that. I think one of the things about you that I admire is the creative approach. Okay, we can't go this direction, so what other directions are available to us that still meet what our needs are? I love that about you.
well, and God hasn't changed us as the people and the giftings that He created in us.
Mhm.
He hasn't done that. He's changed our delivery system.
Yeah.
And so we have to keep that in mind. And I heard something very recently that, Lord, just let Jesus work through me. Don't give me the master plan with bullet points and
Right.
deadlines and stuff like that. I've had, and Ray have had to surrender Parkinson's
Mhm.
to God and say, okay, this is what we got. Can you just give us a lot of direction on how to use it?
Right.
Because it's like anything else. Earlier in my life, I got in God's way because I had my plans. And we just have to settle it down. And one of the things that I'm really, really concentrating on is keeping Ray's dignity.
Yes.
If he loses his physical ability or he falls in front of people or mentally he can't remember a word, or he loses the conversation in the midst of it, or whatever. Last night we were at small group, and he has such a heart for the Lord, and he started a statement and he couldn't remember the rest of it. And our
Mhm.
little signal is, it's okay, it'll come back. Somebody else started talking, and Ray said, I remember now, and continued. That wouldn't have happened years ago. May
Right.
not have happened. I don't know. It's probably happening because he's 68 and I'm 71. You just don't know where that line falls. But the people around us, first of all, don't hide anything from them, but
Right.
be overly, don't give away everything, because
Right.
you start invading dignity.
I think along those lines, it's important also, one of the things that I hear in you is you're not treating Ray as his diagnosis. In other words, that is not his identity. You're respecting who he is as a person. Yes, there is a diagnosis, and yes, it does affect how things look or sound sometimes, but you're not Ray is not his diagnosis, and you're maintaining that that acknowledgement, and I think that's hugely important. I mean, I don't want to be seen as a diagnosis, right? A health diagnosis. I'm more than that. You're
Well,
more than that.
and it's real easy to blame Parkinson's.
Yes.
And that can't become your ultimate excuse
Mhm.
for whatever's happening. First of all, you don't need excuses.
Right.
You need to work with what you got
Mhm.
and make the best of it. And I get tired. I get very tired. I
Mhm.
get weary.
Mhm.
But you have to know, and I have people, I'm I'm willing to listen to people, first of all. And you can't be saint anybody in the midst of this.
Mm, mm-mm.
You
No.
have to have a multi-pronged approach
Mhm.
with multiple people. Even if you don't have a network, there are support groups. There's Greenville Area Parkinson's Society. Those
Mhm.
people are so supportive. My only regret for joining them is that we didn't do it sooner. And we did it pretty early on. We
Mhm.
did it pre-COVID. So it's
Wow.
been, years.
Mhm.
It's very educational, but you don't have to explain yourself to people there.
Right.
Same way
Right.
with the boxing.
Right.
Body has Parkinson's. They call themselves the Parkies. It's not shame.
Right.
It's an understanding. Find your church group. Find a buddy, a friend for you and who you're caring for.
Mhm.
You can get very isolated very quickly.
Yes. What would you tell someone, Debbie, that in closing here, what would you tell somebody who has or who is in the midst of starting this journey with a diagnosis with their loved one, be they male or female, with their spouse? What would you say to encourage them? What would you want them to know?
Don't be overwhelmed. And that's easy for me to get in an overwhelmed state,
Hmm.
because I look at what you've got to do ahead. There's the
Hmm.
daily medications.
Hmm.
And some days I feel like I have a toddler because of the observation required of me.
Hmm.
He's gone out in the yard, fallen, collapsed a lung. He's gone out in the yard, fallen, had to have a brain scan. He fell and hurt his back in the house here a few weeks ago. And you cannot be overwhelmed. You can't let that be the defining end point of what you're doing for the next day or two or month or whatever. You have to say, how are we living? Because you got to keep living.
Right.
You can't just keep taking care of someone,
Hmm.
because at some point care becomes just it's a physical burden.
Yes. It's an emotional one as well for
Yes.
whoever's doing it.
Yeah. And you're
I
consumed by it and you're not living. So you've got to take that time for taking time to hear from the Lord. He may have some brilliant idea, and I'm like, oh, hello. Yeah, I remember you, kind of thing. Or sharing with a friend who you
Mhm.
know is praying for you
Right.
the way.
Yeah.
Sharing issues with, say, those people at the Greenville Area Parkinson Society. We call it GAP.
Right.
Sharing, and they may say, "Oh, well, I tried this," or we may be able to help someone else. It's living in community with Parkinson's. It's not isolation. Please, please, please don't do that because you will just become ingrown and that's painful.
That's fantastic, that's fantastic advice. I think the thing too that I say to clients who are sitting in my office and they are caring for whether it's elderly parents or a spouse or whatever the situation is, you don't have to have all the answers,
Amen.
and you're not going to have all the answers. You touched on control earlier when we first really got started, and it is an exercise in I can't control everything. I don't have all the answers. I am dependent on some others. I'm going to do my own research, but I am dependent upon the medical community to steer me to some degree in what's necessary, what's not necessary. As far as also, the not having all the answers, taking one day at a time. What does this day hold? And you've made it very clear today that Parkinson's is not something that you very easily work with a schedule that's planned too far in advance, because that person may, you may have a day trip planned to go somewhere, and it's not a good last 2 days, and that person's physically not up to it. So I think being able to hold the schedule somewhat loosely and realize just I need to be just here in this moment, in this day. What does today bring? Now there are some things obviously that you have to think about, but for the most part coming back into the present. So Debbie, I thank you so much for being willing to share this part of your private life, with us. And I just I love your heart for the Lord, and I love your heart for your marriage and your husband. And I thank you for everything that you have shared with us where it comes to what this journey has been like with you. Anything else you want to say to the audience before we conclude today?
Yes. In Matthew 11 that we talked about, 28 through 30, it says, learned learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't
Wow.
anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly.
Wow. Thank you for that. That speaks volumes, doesn't it? All right. Much love to you. And again, thank you. Our listeners say thank you as well. We appreciate your presence on our On the Couch podcast. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you for the opportunity.